While I am primarily known on my YouTube channel, I guess, for the Solomonic hoodoo stuff that I teach, and the perception I think is kind of that I am a Solomonic magician or a folk magician primarily. The truth is that I like to describe myself just as a medium usually. And the reason is that mediumship is really the core of my practice in various ways. And with regards to that, I straddle two worlds. I've been trained in Spiritism, specifically Afro-Cuban Spiritism, what's sometimes called Espiritismo, and also in Anglo-Spiritualism. So there are these two forms of spiritualism that I have um, a lot of training and have been had the good fortune of being mentored by some very good quality teachers in both these traditions. And while on the surface it seems like they're quite different, at their core there is more in common between the two forms of spiritualism than there are differences. And of course, Spiritism, or specifically Espiritismo, is a form of creolized Spiritism or a form of creolized spiritualism, right? And of course, spiritualism sprung up in the late 19th century and has to do with communing and working with the dead and mediumship involving the dead. And this kind of happened at the same time all across the world, both in Europe and in the English speaking parts of Europe, and then also, of course, in the Americas. And then it spread from there. And Espiritismo or Afro-Cuban Spiritism absorbed a lot of indigenous and African descended concepts and practices. But at its core, it's still spiritualism. It still has to do with mediumship and working with the dead. And the primary difference is that it uses some more magical technology. So we see the use of spirit dolls, we see the use of glasses of water, spiritual baths, we see smoke and cigars and rum and these kinds of things are incorporated into these spiritual seances in a way to really materialize the spirits more in a way that is more ritualistic, more magical, a little bit more, shall we say, primitive in some sense, because it's incorporating sort of African and indigenous techniques and technologies and blending it with what is just spiritualism as it arose at that time. Now, Anglo spiritualism, on the other hand, um, is much more concerned with technical mediumship, and there are less ritualistic aspects and more emphasis on a sort of a scientific, rational approach. And this is the strength of Anglo spiritualism, that especially the training of the mediums tends to be very structured. There is a very methodical, scientific sort of approach, a mindset to how mediums should be developed and how mediums should be worked. And so, in this regard, it really is a lot more technical. It's got a lot to offer in terms of precision and good quality mediumship and developing really accurate quality mediumship in a systematic way. Whereas with Afro-Cuban Spiritism, it tends to be less structured in the sense that mediums aren't necessarily taught in a very step-by-step way. It's got it in a more immersive quality, and there are these other tools that get used in order to augment the phenomenon in some way. And these tools like song, prayer, trance, uh, uh, herbs, and leaves and fresh, cool water with perfumes. All these things are kind of incorporated into the seances and make the seances a lot more powerful. Whereas Anglo spiritualists really focus more on the spiritual aspect, and there are very few ritualistic aspects in Anglo spiritualism, and especially later on, it's really become quite diluted and watered down, and sort of it's lost something. And as an example, when I was growing up and my grandmother used to go to the spiritualist church, one of the things she was really proud about, one of the things she used to tell me about quite often, and she was quite specific about it, is that, oh, she would go to the church and at first they would read from the Bible and they would sing hymns and they would talk about scripture, and then the mediums would work, and then the mediums would give messages. And this was to reassure me that it was all very holy, it was pure, it was sanctified, it was a religious experience that was somehow contained within the Christian spiritual current, which is, of course, how spiritualism arose. And then later on, within Anglo spiritualism, much of this has been stripped out. Yeah, even though if you go to some spiritualist churches in the UK, or where I come from in South Africa, they still look like churches. There will be pews and so on. They've stopped singing hymns. They've removed the Bible from the lectern. The Bible has been removed, and so it's become much more. And the reason is, I think, that a lot of New Age sort of aversion to Christian symbolism and that has kind of infiltrated the spiritualist movement, and in order to cater for that, they've taken out all these elements. And now you see such ridiculous things as I was at one service, and they were singing, because they still need to raise the power so the mediums can work, of course, which is part of the reason the hymns are sung. Yes, this is the same in Spiritism. We sing songs and that to generate power at the beginning of a service, and then using that power, the mediums can really work well because his energy has been generated, right? Now, of course, the Anglo spiritualists, not all the Anglo spiritualist churches have done this, but many of them have removed the hymns and the biblical stuff. And I was at one service where they sang "Row, row, row your boat." I was even at one thing where they played ABBA in order to generate some sort of energy, with this sort of bizarre rationalization that it's just, we have to sing something that creates some sort of enthusiasm. So they were playing ABBA, and it is quite embarrassing, actually, to see how these elements have been taken out of Anglo spiritualism. On the other hand, Anglo spiritualism has retained a very scientific and structured approach to mediumship, and a very meticulous understanding of how mediumship should be done and how mediums should be developed and what good mediumship should look like. And even though some of these other beautiful qualities have been stripped out, there is still a really good technical aspect of the mediumship, which again, to my way of thinking, sometimes gets lost in Spiritism, or the creolized form of Spiritism. And people kind of get lost in the material aspects of Spiritism, which is the dolls, the perfumes, the cigars, and the working with the herbs and these kinds of things. And it becomes overly theatrical, and the mediumship, the quality of the mediumship is almost sometimes ignored, and all these sort of props become the full content of the service. And so the technical aspect of the mediumship is not always there, not across the board, because it depends on the individual medium. This is one of the reasons I really spent a lot of time training in both styles of spiritualism, because I see them as one continuum, right? They all come from the same impulse at the late 19th century when spiritualism arose, and they kind of diverged in two different directions. And I feel like each retains some elements that have sort of are needed in the other style or in the other tradition, right? And so I've really spent a lot of time in both traditions with my foot in each world in order to kind of to to integrate the aspects of these two different styles of spiritualism into a more balanced whole for myself. I'm just speaking for myself now, and I'm speaking about what I try and teach when I teach students mediumship in my mediumship program. Now, I've discussed some of the differences between Spiritismo or Afro-Cuban Spiritism or Creole Spiritism and Anglo Spiritualism. But I also want to discuss the similarities or in fact the areas in which they are identical, right? And of course, they are both concerned with mediumship. They both started as part of the same movement. And they are connected to communing and providing evidence of the other world and specifically of our dead in various ways, right? So the ancestors and doing what's sometimes in the West called evidential mediumship, which is to provide proof of the afterlife for recipients. And then another important aspect is that the use of spiritual guides are found in both traditions. And with spiritual guides, I don't mean ancestors. Spiritual guides are mighty souls, spirits of the dead, who have some special quality that they then choose to work with a medium in his mediumship practice. And of course, the classic spiritual guide is the Native American spiritual guide. And within the Anglo Spiritualist Church, you of course will hear about White Feather and Red Cloud and so on. And there are a lot of this Native American guides that are sort of the quintessential spirit guide. But of course, in Spiritism, you get the Native American spiritual guide and many other kinds of spiritual guides which fall into sort of broadly ethnic stereotypes. It's a bit like the United Nations, right? And there are different sort of guides that fit into these groupings that then work with the medium, and these are the guides that are incorporated in trance. Now, if you go to the Arthur Findlay College and you attend a trance demonstration or you attend a trance mediumship course there, the mediums will go into trance and they will incorporate their Native American spirit guide or their Gypsy spirit guide or their Chinese spirit guide. And if you go to Cuba or you go to Puerto Rico or you go to a misa somewhere in Europe or in the Americas, everywhere where Spiritismo has spread, the mediums will go into trance and they will incorporate, they will in trance bring through a Native American spirit guide or a Gypsy spirit guide and so on. So this is a universal thing in spiritualism, both in Anglo spiritualism and in Afro-Cuban spiritualism or Creole spiritualism. And so it's an indicator that that the root is the same. That when you go to a service, a spiritist service or a misa in Cuba or Puerto Rico or maybe in Miami or even here in Amsterdam, and there will be more, there will be a white table with flowers and glasses of water and bowls with lustral waters that smell of perfumes that everyone bathes themselves with, and there will be cigar smoke, and there will be a lot more ritual and ceremony and drama and song than if you were to go to a spiritualist church where everyone is kind of wearing something quite formal and it's a little bit more uptight, and they've stripped out most of the ritualistic aspects because of ignorance, really, and you might think that these are two different uh, things, that they're not even related in any way, but they are. The core is identical. The core is very much the same. Some of the philosophical aspects are also different. And the reason, of course, is that Anglo spiritualism has a philosophical basis that was developed in the UK, and Spiritism and Spiritismo, which is a branching off, offshoot of Kardecian Spiritism, which was developed in France by Allan Kardec, has its own philosophy and sort of viewpoints about what the afterlife consists of, whether there is reincarnation, what the souls of the dead do on the other side, and the meaning of the whole thing. And so there are points of departure, certain differences between the two systems, but the core is the same. The core is basically that the dead want to commune with the living, that the dead are alive and well on the other side, and they want to prove their existence, and they can and will provide evidence of their existence and their well-being and their aliveness on the other side by means of mediumship. And this is the work of the medium, to provide that evidence and to provide that communion with the other side, whether that is through mental or active mediumship, working in a conscious way, or through trance, whatever the case may be. The medium works in this way to create a bridge between this life and the afterlife, which dearly wants to communicate with us. So for me, these two schools are really important in my own practice, and I really try to communicate their complementarity, even though the two schools or the two forms of spiritualism, are somewhat at odds on the surface. If you speak to a member of the Anglo Spiritualist Church, and some of them are aware of Spiritism, Kardecian Spiritism, and they are also aware of Spiritismo, but they think it's voodoo. Yeah, they'll say, "Isn't that voodoo?" And they will dismiss it offhand, and they don't actually understand that the Afro-Cuban Spiritists have really a special technology, a wisdom, and a brilliance in how they took the spiritualist philosophy, how they took spiritualist principles of mediumship and the spirit guides, and they augmented that using traditional wisdom, using materials and techniques that you see only in the Americas and in Africa, and really created a really beautiful variation of spiritualism that is at heart the same thing. It's just been augmented with certain tools. So and similar on the other side, spiritists and spiritistas will dismiss Anglo spiritualism and say that they're kind of they're either too new age or they're too technical and so on, and that they don't have any of the cool tools that spiritists have, which of course there is a truth in that, but they miss the technical brilliance and the precision and the structured way in which mediums are trained within the Anglo spiritualist movement, and how excellent their mediumship can become as a result of that structured training, even though much of the soul is being lost in Anglo spiritualism. That is my opinion. You even now see a new contingent within the Anglo Spiritualist Church where they want to do away with spirit guides, where that you would have your Native American guide or your Gypsy guide or your Chinese guide or something. Some of the newer mediums coming up, they were like, no, that's nonsense. They just want to do pure evidential mediumship where they're working with your dead granny or something. And so they've done away with the prayer. They've done away with the hymns. Now they want to do away with the spirit guides, yeah, and it's like it's slowly losing more and more soul, and it's becoming kind of like a dry parlor trick, right? So it's losing its life, it's losing its magic as a result. And this impulse in Anglo spiritualism really is coming from ignorance, right? Ignorance about the function of religious symbolism in the tradition. Something that even my grandmother understood intuitively. My grandmother was not a Bible believing, Bible bashing Christian. She didn't need to think that, you know, the spiritualist church was like literally the sort of the disciplic succession of the Christian church or something. But she understood the value of that sacralizing force, right? Of the Christian hymns, of the mediums standing there with the big Bible. They would put their hands on the Bible sometimes when they were doing their mediumship. And she could understand that this had a sacralizing power that made the mediumship and made the experience a more divine, a more spiritual thing, right? And so she was very happy to have that. So it makes me sad, really sad, to see it being stripped out of Anglo spiritualism, especially when I can see how Afro-Cuban spiritists who revere African deities, the Orishas, and who are a lot more libertine with magical concepts and so on, are perfectly fine, saying the Hail Mary or the Our Father and praying these Kardashian prayers that are very Christian, right? In these services, perfectly happy to do that, and knowing that there is no contradiction, that there's no contradiction between that and the beauty and the power of the service, and that, if you say the Our Father now, somehow you have to be a sort of a staunch Catholic or something in order for it to make sense. The creolized understanding is a lot more capable of understanding nuance and paradox and contradiction in a way that is holistic and integrating and balancing. This is something that's really lost in the West. It's a very all or nothing, black and white kind of thing that ends up being soul destroying and kind of missing the point, taking out the parts of the tradition that are in fact serving an important function. And we see the same thing in many of our other traditions that are being passed down. But that's another topic. But spoiler, it has to do with Solomonic magic. Remember to like and to subscribe. Check out my new book, The Divine Gypsy Mother. I'll link it down below. You can support me by buying some of my goodies. I've got ebooks, I've got PDFs, I've got my candle ministry. We do candle magic for clients. You can come for a reading. You can buy me a coffee down below. Check out my Discord. We've got a very nice Discord where we discuss mediumship, folk magic, Solomonic magic. It's a nice little community, very friendly people, very down-to-earth people. So you're more than welcome to join in the conversation there. It was nice talking to you again, and take care.